Welcome to this MedEWSa short video on how to build a risk matrix. In this video, we will explore the foundations of creating a useful risk matrix, giving examples of impact definitions from current operational services. Then, we will explore how to set up effective risk communication procedures, focusing on some key elements to consider in the process. Let's get started. As a risk matrix is, in principle, a communication tool, we must first think about the eventual audience and their requirements. For a risk matrix to be useful and effective, we should co-create it with input from end users to clearly define the impact categories, likelihood definitions, and associated action statements. Tailoring the information to the end user is important, as different user groups will have different needs during an event. Consider, for example, a moderate rain event impacting a busy motorway during rush hour. The commuting public and highway agencies might need to be aware of or take action, but environmental agencies dealing with flood mitigation may not be as concerned. To co-create these risk matrices, there needs to be an exchange of hazard data, information on vulnerability and exposure, and a log of historic events from the end user to help forecasters or modelers to define the impact categories and risk assessment. Specific definitions and clear terminology are needed for the successful communication of risk. Categorization of impact on the matrix, defining the risk levels, and clarity about the potentially affected area are all necessary elements to consider when communicating the overall risk of a hazardous event. All of these elements combined should lead to clear communication and a common understanding between the forecast provider and the end users of the risk matrix, be it the public or first responders. Take a look at this example of the flood impacts table from the Flood Forecasting Centre for England and Wales. This particular risk matrix is tailored for first responders when dealing with flood events. On the left-hand side, we see different categorizations of potential vulnerabilities which are at risk. These can include populations, transport links, and utilities such as schools and hospitals. On the top row, we see the clearly defined impact categories: minimal, minor, significant, and severe in this example, which equal the very low, low, medium, and high categories on the MedEWSa example risk matrix. These categories indicate the level of impact or severity of the event. You can clearly see that each impact category has direct links to clear and effective action statements, which can be used by first responders during a given event. In this example, significant or medium impacts on communities and transport means some communities could be temporarily inaccessible due to flooded roads and damage to buildings and infrastructure. Another example of how to define the impact level in a risk matrix comes from the Global Flood Awareness System by the Copernicus Emergency Management Service. The GLOFASS Rapid Impact Assessment highlights how different impact categories can be tailored for different use cases. In this example, we can see that the impact categories are based on quantitative data of how many people the GLOFASS model has identified as potentially at risk by the forecasted flooding. Unlike our usual example risk matrix, the GLOFASS Rapid Impact Assessment product replaces the likelihood category with the forecasted time to expected impact. These risk matrices from GLOFASS and the Flood Forecasting Centre for England and Wales are both examples of impact-based forecasting, which will be explained in a separate MedEWSa training video. In addition to having robust definitions of impact categories, when creating a risk matrix, consider also the co-creation of communication processes and procedures for the operational use of the matrix. Topics to consider might include, but are not limited to, scale. Which scale is my risk matrix appropriate for? Does it cover potential risks to a city, region, country, or international area? Risk tolerance. What is the coping capacity of the affected area? Has the area been affected by a recent event? Different levels of risk can apply at certain times, or due to underlying circumstances. When and how will the risk matrix be communicated? A balance between the availability of the latest information versus the timeliness of communication can heavily influence the effectiveness of communication of the risk. Decision hierarchy. If the position of an event on a risk matrix determines the response of emergency management, then the cascade of decision-making should be clearly defined ahead of an event. Messaging. flow of information, and striking the correct tone in emergency response messaging are crucial elements in determining the appropriate level of response and uptake of warnings by the public. Limitations. From forecasters to decision makers, all users of the risk matrix should be aware of the limitations of any given forecast during any event. Finally, when building and using a risk matrix, it is important to have clear communication between the forecast or service provider and the end user at each stage of development and use. That all parties agree on and understand definitions of the impact categories and associated action statements, and that all parties are aware of the operational procedures when using the matrix. That concludes this video on how to build a risk matrix. If you would like to find out more about the benefits of using a risk matrix, watch our Why Use a Risk Matrix video. We hope you enjoyed this MedEWSa short video. Thank you for listening.